The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic born alone in liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It was the inauguration of fear. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Joe Biden takes the oath of office as 46th president of the United States amid an armed lockdown in D.C., pledging unity in a bitterly divided nation and a swift reversal of everything associated with President Trump. Today, we'll take you through this change of administrations and change of party in the Oval Office as we place the tumultuous last 4 years of Donald Trump in context and examine the agenda and many fears expressed by Joe Biden in his inaugural address. We'll be joined by LibertyNation.com's Scott Cosenza, who is on the ground in D.C. for Biden's unique inaugural, and editor-in-chief Leesa K. Donner, who produced our coverage of the changing of the guard, and will join me in a retrospective of how things used to be at inaugurals as we recount the inaugural festivities in Washington we attended for 6 different presidents. We start with a view from ground level of an inaugural like no other, one which may come to be known as the National Guard inauguration. We spoke with Scott Cosenza, LibertyNation.com's man on the ground, covering what little anyone was allowed to cover in Washington, D.C., as Inauguration Day was winding down. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Well, let's just let you paint a word picture for us of what it was like in D.C. for one of the most unusual inaugurations in American history.
Tim, I got into town on the night before the inauguration, and as I do when I work live events, what I typically like to do is get checked into the hotel and then go and take a look around where I might be shooting video or still photos and just talk to people in the area, whatever kind of demonstration it might be. I was shocked beyond words at how locked down the entire central part of the U.S. Capitol city was. The entire National Mall and many blocks surrounding the mall were not only restricted from vehicular traffic, which is what I expected when they said all the number streets would be closed. That was widely reported in our local traffic updates. But what I never thought was that meant to pedestrian traffic as well. I just never even considered it. I've never seen the city more locked down than this. I've been here about a dozen years or so. I've talked to some other people who have been here a lot longer than that, and they also have never seen anything like it. I have to tell you, just the most stark presentation of it, Tim, was right across from Union Station, which was closed to the public, across Massachusetts Avenue. I mean right on the street is a steel blockade fence with razor wire atop it. Pretty stark.
Give us a sense of what kind of mood, to the extent that you could get the pulse of Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, which is, something that only happens every 4 years, and a new president doesn't always come in every 4 years. So it's usually a big event. Was there anything you can describe as a mood on the ground?
There were plenty of people around, just not the throngs of both pro-Biden or anti-Biden or pro-Trump or anti-Trump people that we typically see recently with events in the Capitol.
Give us what kind of local color you were able to soak in your limited exposure, since you were kept at, such a large perimeter.
Well, the other thing that sort of you have to bring to bear is the COVID crisis and what that means for sort of hotel life. So the hotel is a combination of sort of like medical, looks like medical ward with everybody with their masks on who don't want any close contact. And then there are a number of groups of mostly media types that are staying here that are kind of, gaggled together in different pockets.
So then let's conclude this by asking you what the experience was like compared to what you expected. You had to go there with a certain expectation of what you'd see. How did what you actually saw compare to your expectation?
The President of the United States takes the oath of office on the western-facing steps of the Capitol. I was shocked, Tim, that the nearest point by which a journalist who hadn't submitted weeks, if not months ago, a credentials request to the inaugural committee, that they would have to stand over 2 miles away to be in line of sight of that happening. The peaceful transfer of power was invisible by the naked human eye, except for those people handpicked by the committee. So I would say that I was both shocked that that was the case. I would have expected in an enhanced security environment to perhaps be required to go through a security checkpoint to be able to be closer to the goings on, but to have them completely removed from public sight, it seemed un-American to me, Tim. What can I say?
Okay, so Scott, any other thoughts before we let you go?
Well, Tim, I know we have been critical of Joseph R. Biden on the pages of LibertyNation.com in the past, and I expect we'll see more criticism in the future, but none will be more troubling than what I'm about to reveal, which is that Joe Biden thinks that Garth Brooks was the favorite choice to perform perhaps the greatest Negro spiritual ever sung, Amazing Grace. And that's judgment that I just can't abide.
What better note to conclude on than that? Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
That is Scott Cosenza, our man on the ground in D.C. as Joe Biden was inaugurated as 46th president. Later on, we'll recount some memorable experiences of my wife and editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, Leesa K. Donner, over 7 different inaugurations. And we'll analyze the Biden inaugural speech and early actions of his presidency. But up next, the legacy of President Donald John Trump.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curricula. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So let's dispense right now with any polite notion or talking point which seeks to minimize the magnitude of these last 4 years. On that single point, the left and right agree, but that is where the full hard stop comes in. Of course, one side viewed Trump as evil incarnate and consider the man and his administration both a fluke and a vile chapter in American history that should finally close with his prosecution and a purge of all who dared support him. In the starkest contrast imaginable, many or most of those who supported Trump's reelection believe the nation has been robbed of one of its greatest presidents. And yes, some of them would even say he belongs on Mount Rushmore. Welcome to the divided states of America. But facts are stubborn things, unbending, unyielding at every turn. So a truly objective examination of the actual record of the presidency of Donald Trump, free of the media's endemic bias, leaves one with two immediate responses. First, awe at the breadth of reform promised and delivered. And second, wonder at how he was able to get it all done while under constant investigation every single day of his one term in office. The 45th president, ever the businessman and showman, proposed a wildly ambitious agenda and pursued it with reckless abandon, sparing none who stood in his way. He presided over the country as if the clock was ticking, and he'd have precious little time to fulfill his lengthy and brazen agenda. Few believed it could all be done. Many believed almost none of it could be done. But in his farewell address to the nation the day before leaving office, Trump said that as far as he's concerned, he came, he saw, he conquered.
We did what we came here to do, and so much more. 4 years ago, I came to Washington as the only true outsider ever to win the presidency. I had not spent my career as a politician, but as a builder looking at open skylines and imagining infinite possibilities. I ran for president because I knew there were towering new summits for America just waiting to be scaled. I knew the potential for our nation was boundless as long as we put America first.
And that he did, from the southern border to the hallowed halls of NATO to the ISIS caliphate to North Korea. And consider the border wall for a moment. It will forever stand, literally and figuratively, as a signature accomplishment of that man, but also the single most instructive example of what he was able to accomplish through the sheer force of will. Think of what he was up against. He was called every name in the book by the open border left, bitterly opposed at every turn, and had scant support even among Republicans in Congress, fearful of the racist label, one which, of course, has lost its meaning from overuse on Trump and all who would support him. And yet, as he leaves the White House, an impressive 452 miles of that wall have been built, almost half of the full project. Trump came roaring out of the starting gate 4 years ago, a man on a mission, a speed horse, unconcerned with distance, intent on actually accomplishing things considered untouchable by conventional politicians. And he succeeded on a grand scale, unbeknownst to those tuned into the blackout-minded elite media.
I left behind my former life and stepped into a very difficult arena, but an arena nevertheless with all sorts of potential if properly done. America had given me so much, and I wanted to give something back. Together with millions of hardworking patriots across this land, we built the greatest political movement in the history of our country. We also built the greatest economy in the history of the world. It was about America first because we all wanted to make America great again. We restored the principle that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Our agenda was not about right or left. It wasn't about Republican or Democrat, but about the good of a nation.
So the list of ways Trump made a lasting difference is long. A flurry of Mideast peace treaties after finally moving our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Repatriation, bringing home profits held overseas. New and improved trade deals. De-escalation of long-running foreign conflicts. Accountability for our NATO allies. A radically different approach to North Korea. The CEO president knitted those populist nationalist initiatives together with the universal conservative principles of lower taxes achieved in his second year and less regulation. In fact, he promised that 2 regulations would be eliminated for every new one imposed, and it turned out to be more like 10 to 1. Deregulation on a massive scale.
We reignited America's job creation and achieved record low unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, women, almost everyone. income soared, wages boomed, the American dream was restored, and millions were lifted from poverty in just a few short years.
From day one, Trump sent forth the unmistakable message that America was back, better than ever, and once again open for business. And this led to his greatest accomplishments: genuine energy independence, a goal long articulated in the empty rhetoric of career politicians, and a roaring economy with full employment until the pandemic brought Trump and the country low.
We passed the largest package of tax cuts and reforms in American history. We slashed more job-killing regulations than any administration had ever done before. We fixed our broken trade deals, withdrew from the horrible Trans-Pacific Partnership and the impossible Paris Climate Accord, renegotiated the one-sided South Korea deal, and we replaced NAFTA with the groundbreaking USMCA. That's Mexico and Canada, a deal that's worked out very, very well. Also, and very importantly, we imposed historic and monumental tariffs on China, made a great new deal with China. But before the ink was even dry, we and the whole world got hit with the China virus.
And that was that, and Trump was never the same when the virus hit, fighting a losing battle against a deadly virus. But lest we forget, Trump's impact on the federal judiciary is certain to be felt for years or decades to come, while pushing through 3 conservative justices under duress and creating a constitutionalist majority on the high court for perhaps a generation or more. He also named lower court judges at record speed, filling some 280 vacancies, roughly a third of the federal judiciary, all in one drama-filled term. His one-man crusade against the world, fought with precious few allies in his foxhole, was finally derailed despite the widely held belief that the victory of his opponent was illegitimate. In the end, the presidency of Donald J. Trump seemed destined to end in turmoil just as it began. He'll be viewed as the force of nature who planned and executed the most radical and successful frontal assault on the status quo in modern American history. He's a man with no historic parallel. And as we bid him farewell as president, we carry with us a deeply sobering lesson learned over these last 4 years, one we shall never forget. When one man dares to threaten the established order, he does so at his own great peril. But as he prepared to return to life as a private citizen, Trump delivered one final promise.
I want you to know that the movement we started is only just beginning. There's never been anything like it. The belief that a nation must serve its citizens will not dwindle, but instead only grow stronger by the day.
And exactly what that means is anyone's guess. But the Donald is back in his familiar surroundings at Mar-a-Lago, trying to figure that out as we speak. Quick break, and now that we've put the record of the 45th president in perspective, we'll return to analyze the most revealing parts of the inaugural address of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and what lies dead ahead for this 46th president.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So the deed is done, and after 3 tries and 32 years of seeking the highest office in the land, Joe Biden stands as the 46th president of the United States, repeating the age-old oath uttered by every president from George Washington to Donald Trump, and then attempting to stand on the shoulders of presidents in history past.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. The people, the will of the people, has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries.
Now, many will say Joe Biden has an easy act to follow, that by being his old, boring, somnambulistic self, he'll make people appreciate that simply by not being Trump, he'll lower the temperature of a country clearly in need of a break from unceasing upheaval. But as he moves to reverse everything associated with Trump, 17 executive orders reversing Trump's actions on the first day alone, the new president will find that Trump, the president, apart from Trump, the man, may in fact be one of history's hardest acts to follow. But Biden tried to lighten his own burden and own expectations, signaling his virtue by repeating the same thinly veiled attacks on Trump's character that we've been hearing for the last 4 years.
Now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart.
Sounds like a totally different nation than the one depicted by Donald Trump. And as Joe Biden passed the days of his moribund 2020 presidential campaign, a single phrase uttered in one of his rare public appearances, a presidential debate, came to define the man and his vision. It was a phrase which most of us will remember as clarifying and uttered as almost an antidote to President Trump's persistent optimism about overcoming the coronavirus plague: a dark winter. Now, you immediately suppose this to be another in a seemingly unending string of political blunders by the former vice president and current president. After all, what candidate in his right mind would deliberately project a gloomy dystopian vision of the future? Presidential hopefuls have historically and universally postured as optimistic, sunny even. But then virtually every metric that was 100% accurate in the fullness of time in the past was flipped on its head to produce a Biden victory. So the first ever win for darkness over light on the pandemic can just be added to the list. And President Biden certainly carried forward that doom and gloom in an inaugural speech, which was replete with cliches and those oft-repeated calls for unity and fear. That's why we're calling it the inauguration of fear, starting with a massive military lockdown of the people's capital and extending to what the new president describes as 5 separate, simultaneous existential crises.
This is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up?
Well, that's the question now, isn't it? And Biden said so much to do and so little time.
We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. Bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war.
What then can or will the 46th president, together with his razor-thin majorities in the House and Senate, deliver to the American people? Topping the to-do list in the early days of this administration, beyond trying to reverse everything Trump did, are health care reform, climate change legislation, and measures to address racial justice. A public option added to Obamacare, transforming it into Biden care, will certainly require another tax hike. Re-regulating the energy producers who were deregulated by Trump will add familiar pre-Trump burdens back onto an industry that spearheaded energy independence, still the most underrated achievement of President Trump. And the sorry state of race relations would seem to require more than perfunctory virtue signaling bills in Congress condemning white supremacy and a declining Caucasian president thought illegitimate by tens of millions of voters seemingly on his last legs. And now we're witnessing a burgeoning crisis with waves of Central American refugees approaching our southern border, now defended by 452 miles of wall. Undoubtedly encouraged by Trump's defeat and Biden's plea for these refugees to wait and save him from a crisis on day one of his administration, it's difficult to envision anything in the months ahead approaching the utopian vision which the new chief executive will be pressured to embrace by AOC, Bernie, and the progressive wing of the party. Biden's early moves and cabinet nominations suggest a return to the very thing which has defined Biden's 5 decades in Washington, the entrenched establishment. However, time is short for a party in control of the presidency in both chambers of Congress. Democrats in 2008 and Republicans in 2016 were giddy after sweeping those big three. Both were in for rude awakenings 2 years later. So Biden, along with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and company, understands the need to make hay while the sun shines. The question is how he can do so without overturning his predecessor's many landmark achievements for which he was applauded by the majority of the American people and which, love him or hate him, marked Donald Trump as one of the most consequential presidents in American history. We'll break away for a moment, then come back and recount some memorable experiences over the course of 7 different presidential inaugurations.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
As we've recounted during this week's show, the inauguration of Joe Biden was 180 degrees removed from any inauguration any of us have ever witnessed. What's usually a joyous occasion, especially for a new president of a different party, and especially when the man he was reported to defeat was viewed as pure evil, turned out to be an extraordinarily grim occasion, with National Guard troops outnumbering spectators by more than 10-1. And while we've always seen those glamorous inaugural balls in the past, there were no Biden balls. Makes you pine for the days, essentially every inauguration day in modern America, when it was an occasion for hope and soaring promises and glamour and style. Joining me now to recount our shared journey through a number of inaugurations and or inaugural balls we've attended over the years is my much, much, much better half and the editor-in-chief of fast-rising LibertyNation.com, Leesa K. Dunner. Leesa, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
My pleasure as always, of course. So I went to the inauguration of Richard Nixon as a child in 1969 and Jimmy Carter in 1977 before we knew each other. I particularly remember Carter becoming the first president to get out of his limo and shake hands with people. That's now become almost standard in typical inaugural parades. But you and I have been, I would say, semi-regulars at inauguration since 1984 when we attended one of the balls after Reagan's second inauguration. Remember, it was so cold that they canceled the inaugural parade?
Yeah, it was absolutely freezing. And I remember we attended the ball at the Washington Hilton where President Reagan was shot just a few months after being inaugurated for his first term.
So maybe that was the last time before Biden that the parade was canceled, only that was involuntary cancellation. Now,
I think I'm right about this. Reagan was, they were making fun of his age, but I believe he took the oath in just a morning coat and not in an overcoat.
Well, what I remember about that inaugural ball was that we got lost. We got separated from each other. You were with my family, and you all knew where you were. I didn't, and I had no way to reach you because there weren't any cell phones. We spent most of the evening separated, and I was wandering around aimlessly in a sea of, thousands of people, the thousands of Reagan's best friends.
Well, the truth about inaugural balls are that they are just a crush of humanity. I mean, it's sort of go to be seen, but how can you be seen in such a crowd? Right. And the Washington Hilton is one of the largest hotel ballrooms in all of Washington. It's literally thousands of people.
It is. So in 1988, we went to the inaugural ball for Bush 41 at D.C.'s Union Station, which had been redesigned by Elizabeth Dole during the Reagan years. And all I remember from that is the same as the Reagan ball, a sea of humanity crowded in like sardines.
Well, the one thing I remember is that the Washington Union Station has like a platform above, and George and Barbara Bush came out and spun around the dance floor. And that was pretty cool. But, one of the things I remember about all of these inaugural events, whether it was the actual inauguration that we went to or the balls, there were always protests. I mean, this wasn't anything new. I mean, Americans expressed their right to protest. So, this year, I don't know about hope, but we certainly got a lot of change in the inauguration. I was like, they were terrified of people protesting. Now, I understand the Capitol thing happened the week before, a couple of weeks before. But honestly, the Capitol thing wasn't the biggest civil unrest we've had. It just happened to be in an unusual place, the U.S. Capitol.
Well, and of course, that was one riot compared to the roughly 250 plus that we witnessed during the summer, where very few people, it seems, were actually prosecuted for setting communities ablaze and all the rest. We don't have to go into more of it, but let's jump forward to the next inauguration we attended, George W. Bush in 2001, after his razor thin, and that doesn't even describe it, victory over Al Gore. Most people didn't believe on the left that he was a legitimate president, just like Donald Trump. But you have particularly distinct memories of that one.
So I remember your mother and I getting out of a car, and there were all these protesters. I believe at the time it was called Code Pink. And yes. They seemed to be very, very upset that we were wearing fur coats. Meanwhile, that was an environment that a fur coat was made for. I mean, it was absolutely freezing. And so they heckled us, when we got out of the car and we were headed into the hotel, that specific hotel for that ball. But it was no big deal. I mean, nobody was throwing cement milkshakes at us. They were heckling us and hassling us.
It was freezing cold and windy and rainy. And I remember a line that we've used many times since when we had to squeeze into, it was like 6 of us squeezing into a vehicle that really fit 4.
It was a Jeep Cherokee, I remember.
It was a Jeep Cherokee. It was like 6 or 7 of us trying to fit in it. And when my father said that he wanted the driver to come back later to take us somewhere, actually to the inaugural ball, he said, I hope you can get a bigger vehicle because we'd like to arrive at the inaugural ball with some dignity.
Yeah, that was just a great line. I think your brother had to lay down in the trunk of the car, and we were all mushed.
Something like that. So the Bush 43 second inaugural in 2005, which we attended, was low key, as most inaugurals are for a guy who's already president. We got within maybe 40 yards of the Capitol step.
Yeah,
Capitol steps where the oath was administered.
That one kept harkening back to me because as we were trying to get Liberty Nation's Scott Cosenza down to the inauguration this year, I realized that they had taken away every single method that we used. And I remember my mother wasn't in good shape, and she really wanted to go to the inaugural itself. So we took her in a wheelchair. We took the metro. We walked the wheelchair to the Capitol grounds, and we got pretty close. We could actually see him taking the oath of office. We were just regular people. We didn't have any fancy tickets. We didn't have, get into the viewing stand, but we were just regular Americans who wanted to attend the inauguration of the President of the United States, and we had the opportunity to do that. And that's what I felt was so sad about this inauguration. I mean, 25,000 National Guard. The entire mall was closed off. They issued 200,000 tickets. They issued 2,000 tickets. And I just felt like it was not fair to the American people, not just the protesters, but people who supported Biden and wanted to come out and see their guy who they supported be inaugurated.
Now, let's talk about the Trump inaugural. When we attended one of the pre-inaugural balls the night before the swearing in, that was Trump entering the swamp, which he was proposing to drain. So the atmosphere was different than at other inaugurals, it seemed.
But I remember there were plenty of protesters at Trump's inauguration, plenty of them. And,
in fact, there were about more than 20 people arrested that night in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. And I think we went to the Boots and something ball. I don't remember. But look, I think Americans, have a right to protest. They don't have a right to maim and kill and vandalize. But I think just shutting out all the protests is really quite un-American.
Leesa K. Donner, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com. Leesa, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. And don't forget to check out the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel. So that'll do it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.